Good morning. Welcome to Morning Shot. I'm Lynlee. The race for Singapore's ninth president has officially begun. It will be a three-cornered fight on September 1st when Singaporeans head to the polls. Former GIC Chief Investment Officer Mr. Ng Kok Song, former Senior Minister Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, and former NTUC Income Chief Executive Mr. Tan Kin Lian will have just over a week, 8 days to be precise, to win over the hearts and minds of voters before cooling off day on August 31st. For a deeper analysis, we're joined by Eugene Tan, Associate Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University and former nominated Member of Parliament. First off, Eugene, what did you make of yesterday's events?
Morning, Lynlee. I think it was something that many Singaporeans look forward to. The expectation was high that we will all be going to the polls on the 1st of September. And, as usual, there was all the drama,
Yes.
even before nominations closed, early in the morning, there was that controversy over Mr. Tan Kin Lian's post. So I think we will see a very rich campaign in the days ahead. And hopefully, that will enlighten Singaporeans about the role of the president, the powers of the president, as well as the limitations as they go about deciding, who they think should be Singapore's head of state.
So this time around, the election is open to all races. We've got a larger population of more than 2.7 million eligible voters, including a sizable number of young and first-time voters, which form about 15% of the electorate. So what kind of discourse do you think will be important for the candidates to have with the electorate ahead of the polls?
I would say that given the nature of the president's office, the fact that the president is not an alternative center of power, that the president has no policymaking agenda ability, and because the president is the unifying figure of Singapore, that we will have a dignified discourse, about what each candidate brings to the table, not just to the presidency, but also to Singapore. Because I think in the end, when you look at the head of state, it plays such an important role, right? Even though it doesn't have control or direction of public policy. But the role as, Singapore's chief diplomat, the role as the head of state, plus the custodial powers, I think, to protect the reserves as well as the integrity of the public service, I think it is important, that the campaign, brings Singaporeans together, to a better understanding of the presidency. And the campaign should not be a bruising one, such that you will have a situation where society becomes somewhat divided, as a result of the different contestation. I mean, there is no policy platforms, by which candidates will contend with each other. It's really about what they bring to the table, in my view.
So we know that it's going to be quite different from a general election in terms of campaigning. For example, the candidates have slogans, but they're not going to have an election manifesto. And based on the Constitution, the president is not allowed to partake in political or policy matters. So what does it come down to? Is it really going to be a battle of the CVs?
I have described it, the presidential contest as a battle of CVs. And by that, I mean, the fact that the track record of the candidates matter significantly, right? Because they're not contesting on different visions of the presidency in terms of, what policy agendas they have. But it is obviously more than just the track record, right? I mean, looking at it from the track record is taking a very rational approach. But I think voters will certainly also consider which candidate inspires trust and confidence, which candidate they think, will represent Singapore well on the international stage. I mean, we tend to think of this as very ceremonial sort of functions. But I think, given the small state that Singapore is, I think it is very important, that every prominent leader, and in this case, the head of state, be able to put Singapore's position to foreign leaders,
Mm-hmm.
to international organizations, in a way that projects our voice, protects our national interests,
Mm.
and promotes, Singapore's interests. So I think it's more than just a battle of CV, but certainly one that, I still feel, that the track record matters because it gives us a good indication of how a particular candidate is going to function in that very important office.
Let's get into what they've been saying in terms of the nomination speeches. Mr. Ng Kok Song says he aims to safeguard Singapore's three national treasures, namely reserves, good public administration, and social stability. Mr. Tharman offered his decades long experience nationally and internationally against a challenging future, looking forward to a fair, dignified, and honorable contest. And Mr. Tan Kin Lian stressed that if he's elected, he will safeguard the reserves and uphold the integrity of the public service diligently, honestly, and to the best of his ability. Beyond that, how would you assess each of the candidates based on the issues they've said they will champion so far?
Lynlee, these were statements that were made in a short 2-minute speeches that each candidate had, after they were confirmed, to be nominated candidates, for
Mhm.
the election
That's right.
on the 1st of September. And I think obviously, if they keep to what they said that, will be the focus, I think we will have a very rich and meaningful discussion. But I think a lot remains over the coming 8 days, how they are going to unpack,
Mm.
as it were, the issues,
Mhm.
the way they're going to, how they see themselves as president. I think that's going to be critical, and we can expect drama, but I think in terms of, trying to assess each candidate, I think we can see based on the unofficial campaigning before nomination day, that Mr. Ng Kok Song and Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam, will very likely keep to, what the presidency is.
Mm.
I think Mr. Tan Kin Lian, there's a possibility that, he might seek, to paint a vision of what the presidency ought to be.
Mm.
And again, each candidate will have their own way of trying to win the hearts and minds of voters. But I think in the end, each candidate will try to focus on the issues, that matter to Singaporeans, but based on what the president's powers and limitations are. So we'll see. I think
Mhm.
it's 12 years since we had a
That's
last
right.
since the last contested
Mhm.
presidential election, and really, each election is different, and
Mm.
we'll see what happens. Given the concerns that Singaporeans
Yeah, looks to
have.
be an interesting one for sure. Now, candidates in the coming days will be walking the ground, and I think they've already started doing that, walking the ground, mingling with electors. So how much weight will this, walkabout exert when it comes to leaving an impression on voters, and how might that eventually translate to the polls?
I think it's very significant. This physical, in-person contact points, that candidates have with voters. We know that it's a given that they have to campaign online, because that's a way in which voters can easily access information about the candidates, find out more about the candidates. But social media is somewhat scripted, in a way. I would also go so far as to say that, it doesn't convey, the authenticity of a candidate. It is only in the fiscal walkabouts, when candidates, engage
Mm.
with voters. That's unscripted. You never know what a voter coming up to you is going to say. How they might respond to you. But it is in this real world,
Mhm.
right, where if you are able to leave a very strong impression, be able to persuade a voter, that you have what it takes to be the president, based on whatever else the voter may know, that this voter may then influence others to
Mm.
say, well, maybe this is one person we should vote, or this is one person that we should stay away from. I don't think social media does that.
Mm.
In a way, it's likening it to social media, right? You can have a lot of friends, but the question is how many of them are really true
Mm.
friendships. And I would say that that's very much the same when it comes to campaigning. So in a way, elections have become more demanding, right? Candidates must walk the ground, the
Mhm.
physical ground, but they must always ever be present on social media. But politics and elections, well, in this case, the presidential is not about politics. Elections are really about a human enterprise, and I would say that that means that contact, that the engagement in real time, in person, is hugely important.
Talking about engagement, they've also selected symbols for the election campaign. Kok Song, an open hand with a heart in its palm, Daman, a pineapple, Tan Kin Lian, a depiction of four persons holding up a flower. Why are having these symbols important, Eugene? And is there historical context to it? And how does it apply to modern times?
Well, I think if we look at the history of political symbols, or in this case, election symbols rather than political symbols, they were a way in which voters could identify candidates, right? If we look back 50, 60 years, in Singapore, literacy rates were not so high, and people may not be familiar, with characters in the Roman script. And so symbols were a way, of trying to connect a voter to a particular candidate. I think in today's context, it is perhaps, in my view, less important, but still influential, right? So if you think about Mr. Tharman's choice of a pineapple, somewhat counterintuitive, right? He didn't opt for an evocative symbol like that of his the other candidates, and that got people talking, right? People are trying to find out what exactly is the pineapple all about, and you could imagine that would have generated a lot of traffic, to his various social media platforms. But I think the symbols also provide an opportunity for the candidates, to convey, what does the presidency mean to them, right? So whether it's Mr. Ng's open hand with the heart in palm, and Mr. Tan Kin Lian, four persons holding a flower to symbolize harmony. I think all this are themes, messages, key messages that they want to put across. But a lot will depend. These symbols will mean nothing if the campaigning is totally at odds, with those symbols.
Singapore's president is often seen as a super diplomat, someone who flies the nation's flag high on the global stage with other world leaders. No doubt an important part of the job of the head of state, but how important is it? To what extent will that matter to the majority of the voters when they make their choice?
It would vary from voter to voter, right? I don't think it would be the top of the mind sort of consideration, but I personally hope that it would, right? Because we are looking at the president as the chief diplomat, the head of state who goes on state visits. And it's not just the pomp and ceremony, right? But in meetings with world leaders, whether they come to Singapore or whether the president travels abroad, if we can add substance, if the president can articulate Singapore's position and be able to win people over, countries over for Singapore, I think that's a tremendous benefit.
Okay, beyond the custodial duties of the president, we saw President Halimah champion many social causes, such as protection for older workers, empowering people with disabilities, as well as building interfaith relationships and even encouraging multicultural dialogue. When ratcheting up promises during the campaign, what should the candidates be aware of, and what should they steer clear of?
I would say that candidates should not misrepresent the office of the president. So in that sense, not campaigning on the basis for an office that doesn't exist. I think it's attractive, right? Because if you say you're going to do A to Z, it would come across as, you're going to be very active, you're going to be busy, you are going to be a very engaged president, taking on the government and all, but the question really that should be asked, can you really do all that, given the constitutional powers and limits of the president? So I hope that in the end, it is important to have that dignified discourse, and to ensure, that Singaporeans, go to the polls with a clear idea, of what the president can do and what each candidate brings to the table.
Eugene, right at the start of the interview, we talked about Mr. Tan Kin Lian getting embroiled in controversy as a result of his Facebook posts on pretty girls. He lost his election deposit last time round in 2011. Second time hopeful, but with such a controversy, will he be able to overturn the last result?
I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Tan's campaign has started, even before the gun went off, embroiled in controversy. And his digging in, coming out very defensive and throwing accusations at others, I think has, left, at least for me, a somewhat bitter taste. I don't think this is how someone who seeks to be a unifying figure ought to conduct himself. And I hope that, he will be able to put this behind and campaign, in a dignified manner, something that is befitting someone who is aiming to be Singapore's president. Because I think you could have the whole election mired in controversy, drama, and I don't think that's something that will be good for the presidency, particularly at this time when the need for a president that can unite Singaporeans, at a time of greater diversity and political competition, a president that can unite Singaporeans, I think, will be very, very crucial.
Okay. Can I put you on the spot? Who do you think
Certainly.
will win?
Well, I think it's still early days, right? We all know that, Mr. Tharman is widely regarded as the front runner.
Mhm.
I think Mr. Tharman would probably want to regard himself as the underdog. But the way I look at how the campaign, based on the unofficial electioneering, before yesterday, nomination day,
Mhm.
I think we will probably see the race narrow down, to a two-horse one.
Mhm.
I'm not going to mention who, which are the
Okay.
two candidates then, but I think we are likely to see two candidates differentiating themselves clearly. But that doesn't mean that the third candidate is way out, right? And I think a lot depends on what they make of the campaign, how they go about campaigning, and how they focus, on what the president can do for Singapore and Singaporeans, within the constitutional framework that the president has.
All right. As always, Eugene, always a pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you so much for your perspectives this morning and for coming into the studio.
Thank you for having me.
We've been speaking with Eugene Tan, Associate Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University, who's also a former nominated Member of Parliament. Stay with Money FM 89.3.
Money FM 89.3.